They said Paul Heyman was untouchable. The wise man, the special counsel, the brilliant mind who had manipulated storylines and wrestlers for 3 decades without ever facing real consequences for his backstage politics and corporate betrayals. But Jey Uso just shattered that myth with a slap heard around the wrestling world, and when you discover the sickening reason behind this attack on an injured 60-year-old man, you're going to lose your mind with rage. Paul Heyman didn't just betray Roman Reigns when his tribal chief was hospitalized, he sold out the entire Bloodline family to WWE executives for a guaranteed contract extension and a promise that he'd never face consequences for his decades of manipulation and lies. The attack happened yesterday afternoon at WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, where Heyman was meeting with board members to finalize his new 5-year contract extension worth a reported $12 million. Jey Uso wasn't scheduled to be in the building, wasn't part of any meetings or storyline discussions, but he'd driven 300 miles from his home in Florida for one specific purpose: to confront the man who had destroyed his family while pretending to be their loyal advocate. Jey walked into that boardroom like a man on a mission, an eyewitness later revealed. He didn't say a word to security, didn't announce himself to the receptionist, didn't follow any of the normal protocols for visiting WWE headquarters. He just walked straight to where Heyman was sitting at that conference table, surrounded by executives and lawyers, and delivered justice that was months overdue. But before we get to the moment that changed everything, you need to understand exactly what Paul Heyman did to earn that slap, because his crimes against the bloodline go far beyond simple storyline betrayals or character development decisions. This is about real money, real contracts, real careers that were destroyed by a man who built his reputation on loyalty while practicing the most calculated form of self-serving treachery in wrestling history. It started during Roman's mysterious hospitalization, when WWE executives were scrambling to restructure their entire programming around their absent champion. While Roman was fighting for his health in a San Diego hospital room, while his family was dealing with the trauma of watching their patriarch suffer, Paul Heyman was in corporate meetings discussing how to pivot away from the Roman dependency and explore new revenue opportunities. Heyman had 3 different meetings with WWE executives during the first week of Roman's hospitalization, a source close to the situation revealed. Not one of those meetings was about Roman's health or recovery timeline. All 3 were about how WWE could use Roman's absence to restructure contracts, reduce guaranteed money, and eliminate wrestlers who had become too expensive or too difficult to control. The corporate callousness of using Roman's health crisis as a business opportunity was disgusting enough, but Heyman's role in these discussions revealed the true depth of his betrayal. The man who had spent years proclaiming his loyalty to the tribal chief was actively helping WWE executives plan for a future without him. Heyman provided detailed information about Roman's contract structure, his guaranteed appearance minimums, his merchandise percentages, everything that WWE needed to know to break or restructure his deal, the source continued. He was essentially serving as corporate intelligence against his own client while that client was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. But Heyman's betrayal of Roman was just the beginning of his systematic destruction of the Bloodline family's financial security and career prospects. While Jimmy and Jey Uso believed their advocate was protecting their interests during Roman's absence, he was actually meeting with WWE executives to discuss how the company could minimize the Uso twins' leverage and reduce their contract demands. Heyman told WWE that the Usos were overpaid mid-carders who only had value because of their association with Roman, another insider revealed. He suggested that with Roman potentially gone, WWE should restructure their contracts to reflect their actual market value rather than their inflated Bloodline premium. The systematic nature of Heyman's betrayals revealed a man who had been planning for the Bloodline's downfall long before Roman's hospitalization provided the perfect opportunity to execute his plans. He hadn't just opportunistically abandoned his clients when they became inconvenient, he had been actively working to undermine them while maintaining the facade of loyal representation. Paul had been building relationships with other wrestlers for months, the insider continued. Taking meetings with Cody Rhodes, having dinners with Drew McIntyre, positioning himself as the advocate for whoever WWE chose as Roman's replacement. The hospitalization just accelerated his timeline. But perhaps the most sickening aspect of Heyman's betrayal was his manipulation of Roman's medical information for corporate advantage. As Roman's advocate and confidant, Heyman had access to private health details that he should have protected with his life. Instead, he used that information to help WWE executives plan storylines and contract negotiations based on Roman's actual condition rather than the company's public statements. Heyman knew exactly how serious Roman's condition was weeks before anyone else, a medical source revealed. He had copies of lab results, doctors' reports, treatment recommendations, information that Roman trusted him with as his closest advisor, and he shared all of it with WWE executives to help them prepare contingency plans. This violation of medical privacy represented more than just professional betrayal, it was a fundamental breach of human trust that revealed Heyman's complete lack of moral boundaries when his own interests were at stake. But Jey Uso discovered something even more damaging than medical privacy violations or contract manipulation. Through his own investigation into Heyman's activities during Roman's hospitalization, he uncovered evidence that the wise man had been actively sabotaging the Bloodline's unity long before Roman's health crisis provided cover for his betrayals. Heyman had been playing all sides against each other for over a year, Jey later revealed in an explosive interview. Telling Jimmy one thing, telling me something different, feeding Roman information designed to create suspicion and paranoia within the family. He was systematically destroying our relationships while presenting himself as the neutral advisor trying to keep us together. The psychological manipulation that Heyman employed against the Bloodline family was sophisticated and cruel, designed to create the kind of internal conflict that would eventually tear them apart from within. He understood that a divided Bloodline would be easier for WWE to control and more likely to accept unfavorable contract terms. Paul would tell Roman that Jimmy was complaining about being overshadowed, Jey continued. Then he'd tell Jimmy that Roman was considering replacing him with younger talent. Meanwhile, he'd tell me that both of them were discussing my attitude problems behind my back. Every conversation was designed to plant seeds of doubt and resentment, but Heyman's manipulation extended beyond just creating interpersonal conflict. He was also feeding WWE executives detailed intelligence about the Bloodline's internal dynamics, their contract negotiation strategies, their personal relationships, and their individual weaknesses that could be exploited during business discussions. WWE knew everything about our family because Paul was telling them everything, Jey revealed with obvious anger. Our financial situations, our personal problems, our career concerns, our individual contract priorities, Paul was serving as a corporate spy while pretending to be our advocate. This systematic intelligence gathering allowed WWE to approach each Bloodline member's contract negotiations with perfect knowledge of their leverage, their alternatives, and their pressure points. The company could make precisely calculated offers designed to create division and resentment within the family while ensuring their own maximum financial advantage. They knew exactly how much money each of us needed, exactly what kind of creative control we valued, exactly which family members were most likely to break ranks under pressure, Jey continued. Paul had given them a psychological profile of our entire family that they could use as a weapon against us. But perhaps the most damaging information that Heyman provided to WWE executives concerned the Bloodline's long-term loyalty to the company. He revealed private conversations about other wrestling promotions, discussions about AEW contracts, and personal opinions about WWE's creative direction that should have remained confidential. Paul recorded conversations, Jey revealed in perhaps his most explosive allegation. He had audio recordings of family discussions about WWE's booking, about AEW's offers, about our frustrations with creative decisions. He was building a database of compromising information that WWE could use against us if we ever tried to leave. The revelation that Heyman had been secretly recording private conversations with his clients represented a level of betrayal that went far beyond normal business misconduct. He had violated the most basic principles of attorney-client privilege and personal trust to create leverage for his corporate masters. We trusted Paul with our most private thoughts, our deepest concerns, our honest opinions about the business, Jey explained with obvious pain. We thought those conversations were protected, that he was our advocate and confidant. Instead, he was building a case against us, documenting everything we said that WWE could use to control or punish us. But the audio recordings were just one component of Heyman's systematic documentation of Bloodline vulnerabilities. He had also compiled detailed financial records, personal relationship assessments, and psychological evaluations that painted each family member as either a corporate asset or a potential liability. Paul had files on all of us, Jey continued. Not just wrestling-related information, but personal details about our marriages, our children, our financial obligations, our individual insecurities. He was building comprehensive profiles that WWE could use to manipulate us emotionally and financially. The corporate psychological warfare that Heyman had enabled represented a level of systematic manipulation that transformed WWE from entertainment company to predatory organization willing to exploit their performers' most intimate vulnerabilities. But Jey's investigation into Heyman's betrayals revealed something even more sinister than psychological manipulation or privacy violations. He discovered that Heyman had been actively working to sabotage the Bloodline's relationships with other wrestling promotions to ensure they remained trapped within WWE's system. Paul was feeding information to WWE about AEW's contract offers, Jey revealed. Details about their financial terms, their creative promises, their timeline for making offers. WWE always seemed to know exactly what AEW was planning because Paul was serving as their intelligence source. This corporate espionage allowed WWE to make strategic counteroffers designed to keep Bloodline members locked into their current contracts while preventing them from exploring potentially better opportunities with competing promotions. Every time AEW made an attractive offer, WWE somehow knew about it immediately and could respond with just enough additional money or creative control to keep us from jumping ship, Jey explained. We thought we were negotiating from a position of strength, but Paul had already told WWE our bottom line. But Heyman's sabotage of external opportunities was matched by his manipulation of internal WWE politics to ensure that Bloodline members remained dependent on his advocacy rather than developing their own corporate relationships. Paul actively discouraged us from building direct relationships with WWE executives, Jey continued. He insisted that all communication should go through him, that direct contact would damage our positioning, that his experience and connections made him indispensable to our success. This isolation strategy ensured that Heyman remained the sole conduit between the Bloodline and WWE's power structure, giving him complete control over the information flowing in both directions and maximum leverage over all parties involved. We were completely dependent on Paul's version of events, Jey realized. If WWE executives were unhappy with our performances, we heard about it through Paul. If there were creative opportunities available, Paul decided whether we'd even know about them. He controlled our entire relationship with the company. But the most damaging aspect of Heyman's manipulation was his role in creating the conditions that led to Roman's mysterious hospitalization. Through his investigation, Jey discovered evidence suggesting that Heyman had been aware of plans to sabotage Roman's health supplements weeks before the poisoning actually occurred. Paul knew, Jey stated with absolute certainty. He knew that Solo had made a deal with WWE executives, knew that Roman was being set up, knew that the poisoning was coming, and he did nothing to stop it because Roman's elimination served his own interests. This accusation, that Heyman had advanced knowledge of the plot to poison Roman and chose to allow it to proceed, elevated his betrayal from business misconduct to potential accessory to attempted murder. Paul's new contract included protection from any legal liability related to Bloodline-associated incidents, Jey revealed. WWE guaranteed that they would cover his legal expenses and provide criminal defense if he was ever implicated in any wrongdoing. That clause only makes sense if they knew he was going to be involved in criminal activity. The contractual protection that Heyman had negotiated suggested that both he and WWE executives were aware that their manipulation of Bloodline dynamics might cross legal boundaries and result in criminal charges. They were planning Roman's elimination for months, Jey concluded. Paul was part of those plans from the beginning, feeding them information, creating opportunities, positioning himself to benefit from Roman's downfall. The poisoning wasn't a spontaneous act by Solo, it was a coordinated corporate operation. This revelation transformed Heyman from opportunistic betrayer to active conspirator in attempted murder, making him a legitimate target for the kind of justice that transcends normal business disputes or wrestling storyline conflicts. Armed with this evidence of systematic betrayal, criminal conspiracy, and attempted murder, Jey Uso drove to WWE headquarters with the specific intention of confronting Heyman and delivering justice that the legal system seemed unable or unwilling to provide. I wasn't going there to have a conversation, Jey later explained. I wasn't interested in hearing his explanations or excuses or attempts to justify what he'd done to my family. I was going there to make sure he understood that actions have consequences. The confrontation took place in WWE's main conference room, where Heyman was meeting with board members to finalize his new contract. The room was filled with corporate executives, legal representatives, and financial advisors who had gathered to celebrate Heyman's new deal and discuss his expanded role within the company. Jey walked into that room like an avenging angel, one witness later described. He didn't acknowledge anyone else in the room, didn't respond to security concerns or executive questions. He walked straight to where Paul was sitting and said exactly 4 words, "You betrayed my family." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in that conference room understood that they were witnessing something that transcended normal business meetings or contract negotiations. This was personal justice being delivered by a man who had discovered the full scope of his advocate's betrayal. Paul tried to stand up, tried to say something about misunderstandings or business necessities, the witness continued. But Jey wasn't interested in hearing any of it. He was there to deliver a message, not to have a debate. What happened next was captured on the conference room's security cameras and has since become one of the most watched pieces of wrestling-related footage in internet history. Jey Uso, standing over the seated Paul Heyman, delivered a slap that carried the weight of months of betrayal, family destruction, and attempted murder. The sound of that slap echoed through the entire floor, another witness recalled. It wasn't just the physical impact, it was the sound of consequences finally catching up with someone who thought he was untouchable. But the slap was accompanied by words that transformed it from simple assault to profound moral statement about loyalty, family, and the consequences of betrayal. "That's for Roman," Jey said as his hand connected with Heyman's face. "That's for Jimmy. That's for our father, our children, and every member of our family that you sold out for money and job security." The moral clarity of Jey's statement resonated through that conference room and, eventually, through the entire wrestling industry. This wasn't random violence or emotional outburst, this was justice being delivered by a man who had discovered the full scope of his advocate's crimes. Paul's glasses flew across the room, one witness noted. He was knocked back in his chair, completely stunned, bleeding from his nose, looking around the room like he couldn't believe that someone had finally held him accountable for his actions. But Jey wasn't finished with his moral education of the wise man standing over Heyman's bleeding form. He delivered additional verbal punishment that exposed the full scope of Paul's betrayals to everyone in that corporate conference room. "You recorded our private conversations," Jey continued, his voice carrying the authority of absolute moral certainty. "You shared our medical information with corporate executives. You sabotaged our contract negotiations and fed intelligence to our enemies while pretending to be our advocate. Each accusation hit the conference room like a bomb, revealing to WWE executives and legal representatives the scope of Heyman's duplicitous activities and the methods he had used to maintain his corporate position. You knew they were planning to poison Roman. Jey's voice rose with righteous fury. You were part of the conspiracy to eliminate him, and you did nothing to protect the man who trusted you with his life because his death served your career interests. This accusation of complicity in attempted murder sent shockwaves through the conference room and transformed the entire situation from simple assault to potential criminal confession. The executives started looking at each other with real concern, one witness observed. They were realizing that their new $12 million advocate might have just been exposed as an accessory to attempted murder, and that their own contractual protections might not be enough to shield them from criminal liability. But Jey had saved his most damaging revelation for last, the one piece of information that would destroy Heyman's reputation permanently and expose the true scope of WWE's corporate corruption. You want to know why Paul really betrayed us? Jey asked the room, though his question was clearly directed at the security cameras that he knew were recording everything. Because WWE promised him immunity. Complete protection from any legal consequences related to Roman's poisoning, Solo's criminal actions, or any other bloodline-related criminal activity. The revelation that WWE had provided Heyman with criminal immunity in exchange for his cooperation against the bloodline transformed the entire situation from business misconduct to organized crime conspiracy. They made him an offer he couldn't refuse, Jey continued, his words carrying the weight of explosive corporate secrets. $12 million, guaranteed contract extension, complete legal protection, and a promise that he would never face consequences for anything he did to destroy our family. The executives in that conference room were hearing their own criminal conspiracy exposed in real time, learning that their new advocate had just revealed the details of their corruption to cameras that would soon be subpoenaed by federal investigators. Paul sold us out for money and protection, Jey concluded with finality. But he forgot that some things are more important than contracts and corporate immunity. Family loyalty isn't something you can buy or sell, and betraying it comes with consequences that money can't fix. With his message delivered and his justice administered, Jey Uso walked out of that conference room and out of WWE headquarters, leaving behind a bleeding Paul Heyman and a room full of corporate executives who suddenly realized that their criminal conspiracy had been exposed by the very man they thought they had corrupted. The silence after Jey left was deafening, one witness recalled. Everyone in that room understood that they had just witnessed something that would change everything. Paul's betrayal had finally caught up with him, and now everyone involved in the conspiracy was exposed. But the consequences of Jey's confrontation extended far beyond one slap or one exposed conspiracy. Within hours, federal investigators were requesting copies of the conference room security footage, WWE's stock price was dropping as news of the criminal allegations spread, and wrestling media was reporting the biggest corporate scandal in sports entertainment history. Jey didn't just slap Paul Heyman, one industry insider observed. He exposed an entire criminal enterprise that goes to the very top of WWE's corporate structure. That slap was heard around the wrestling world because it represented justice finally being served against people who thought they were untouchable. The medical report on Heyman's injuries revealed a broken nose, a mild concussion, and severe facial bruising that would keep him out of public appearances for weeks. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the destruction of his reputation and the criminal liability he now faced. Paul's career is over, another insider noted. Not because of the slap, but because of what the slap exposed. No wrestler will ever trust him again, no company will hire him as an advocate, and federal prosecutors are building cases that could put him in prison for decades. But perhaps the most significant outcome of Jey's confrontation was the message it sent to other wrestlers about standing up to corporate corruption and systematic betrayal. Jey showed everyone that these corporate manipulators aren't untouchable, one wrestler commented anonymously. Paul Heyman spent decades destroying careers and betraying talent while hiding behind his reputation and corporate protection. But one slap from someone who'd had enough brought his whole world crashing down. The wrestling industry was witnessing a transformation in the relationship between performers and corporate executives, with Jey Uso's moral courage inspiring other wrestlers to speak out about their own experiences with systematic manipulation and betrayal. This is just the beginning, Jey promised in his post-confrontation interview. Paul Heyman was just one piece of a much larger puzzle of corporate corruption that extends throughout the wrestling industry. That slap was the first blow in a war against systematic exploitation of wrestlers and their families. The war that Jey had declared wasn't just about revenge for past betrayals, it was about creating a wrestling industry where performers could trust their advocates, where families were protected from corporate manipulation, and where loyalty was rewarded rather than exploited. Paul Heyman thought he was untouchable, Jey concluded with satisfaction. He thought his corporate protection and financial security made him immune to consequences. But he forgot that justice doesn't come from boardrooms or legal contracts, it comes from people who refuse to accept betrayal and have the courage to fight back. The slap that shocked the wrestling world wasn't just about one man's revenge against his betrayer, it was about fundamental principles of loyalty, family protection, and moral courage that transcend corporate politics and financial considerations. Paul Heyman had learned the hard way that some lines should never be crossed, some betrayals are unforgivable, and some people will always choose family loyalty over financial security. The wise man's wisdom had finally run out, and Jey Uso had delivered the education he'd been lacking for 30 years.